and paved the way for the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords signed last year were a significant step in fundamentally improving the security, economic, and diplomatic environment in the Middle East. But they also underscored the significant threat that Iran poses to our regional partners. I would hope future negotiations with Iran would include extensive consultations with not just Congress, but also Israel and our Gulf partners. And given its significant implications, any new deal should also be submitted as a treaty for Senate ratifications. I understand that that's a controversial issue, but if we're going to have the support of the United States, it can't just be one branch of government. It needs to be all branches of government. I hope that the Biden administration will adhere to these conditions before and during any engagement with Iran, and I sincerely appreciate, Mr. Blinken, your offer that prior to beginning or ending all of these negotiations, there will be significant consultation with this committee. I greatly appreciate that. Another area of serious concern with the new administration, obviously, is China, which I believe will be our greatest foreign policy challenge of this century. On a personal note, I want to thank you, Mr. Blinken, for having read the report, the 143-page report that I published just recently, and I also appreciate the kind words that you had for the conclusions and suggestions in that report. China is a strategic and global competitor of the United States, and the Chinese Communist Party routinely engages in economic coercion, military aggression, human rights abuses, and influence operations. Its policies deliberately damage U.S. interests and values. In the face of the Chinese Communist Party's dangerous goals, the United States must maintain a strong competitive stance. Rising to this challenge is now a sprint and a marathon that will require sustained political will, expanded cooperation with allies and partners, and properly aligned resources and personnel. Last year, I introduced the Strategic Act, the first comprehensive legislative proposal to compete with China effectively. This bill was written with Democratic senators' input and other Democrat organizations around this city who are in the think tank business, along with Republican think tanks. And it should be noted that China is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue. I know Senator Menendez has strong concerns in this regard also, and I hope we will work together as we move forward with those challenges. I hope and expect that the Biden administration will pursue bipartisan cooperation on challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party. One of those challenges is Taiwan. The PRC's obliteration of Hong Kong's autonomy last year makes the question of Taiwan's future all the more urgent and serious. China's
You've been on 400,000 gas. Any comments?
Sorry, sir. to Lita, AP.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks a lot. This question is for General Hokanson, but Jonathan, if you want to weigh in at all, that'd be great. General, I know you mentioned extremism. What can you tell us about the approximately a dozen or possibly more National Guard members who've been pulled off duty because of either posts on social media or other issues? How big of a threat do you think this is? Do you think there are more? And frankly, any details on this that you can provide, I think would be good, since obviously the general public is listening and watching this event with great concern. Thank you.
Lita, thank you for that question. And so we work very closely with law enforcement, and if there's any
security, and economic well-being of Americans. Further south, I'm encouraged by the Biden administration's plans to renew our commitment to the multilateral efforts we must lead in order to improve the effectiveness of international sanctions and humanitarian aid as we pursue a diplomatic solution to the Venezuelan crisis. Maduro's campaign of crimes against humanity and attacks against interim President Juan Guaido and democratic civil society, which I hope the administration will recognize interim President Guaido, all have serious implications for U.S. national security and regional stability. Mr. Blinken, I also hope you'll support Ambassador Bill Richardson's efforts to free the six Americans who have been unjustly detained in Venezuela. I'm confident that if confirmed, you'll do everything you can to repair and restore American leadership abroad. Foundational to that effort will be rebuilding and reinvigorating the State Department itself. As you well know, our career foreign and civil servants are incredibly talented and dedicated. Over the past few years, however, they have been treated with disdain, smeared, and forced out of public service. There has been a stunning loss of expertise, steep declines in morale, little accountability for those at the top, and the State Department still has not achieved a workforce that comes close to reflecting the diversity of our country. This state of affairs has impacted relationships across the globe, the Department's ability to engage in the interagency process and in its relationship with Congress. So the challenges you'll be facing are immense, but I have confidence in your experience and expertise. I look forward to hearing your testimony. And upon confirmation, I look forward to working with you to restore America's place in the world and to repair and rebuild our relationships and our institutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Ms. Blinken, after our conversations earlier today and after hearing our opening statements, Senator Menendez's input in that regard, as you can see, there isn't a whole lot of daylight between us on most of these issues. Certainly almost none whatsoever when it comes to objectives. Strategy and how to get there is obviously something that needs to be negotiated, and all of our best heads put together to try to get to that position. So we're interested in hearing that. Obviously, as Senator Menendez said, Iran is at the top of the list. China and Russia are right behind that. We have serious problems in Turkey. North Korea is on the list, and there's lots and lots of challenges. But we will do better if we all pull the wagon together, and I think we're headed in that direction right now. So with that, again, thank you for your willingness to serve, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And to you, to Ranking Member Menendez, to all the members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I greatly appreciate everything you've done to make this hearing possible in this time. And I want to thank Senator Durbin in absentia for his very kind introduction. It is truly the honor of a lifetime to appear before this committee as President-elect Biden's nominee to be Secretary of State. And it's an honor that carries special significance for me for two reasons. First, as you've noted, I had the privilege of serving as the Democratic Staff Director of this committee for 6 years, working alongside a distinguished group of senators, including several still on the committee today, to advance American diplomacy and safeguard the interests of the American people. That experience gave me an abiding respect for this committee, for its finest bipartisan traditions, for the caliber of its members and staff, for the essential work it does to strengthen U.S. leadership around the world. If I have the honor of being confirmed, those lessons that I learned in my years with this committee will guide my approach to our work together. The second point of significance for me is a little bit more personal. In addition to my own confirmation as Deputy Secretary of State, this committee confirmed my wife, Evan Ryan, who is here with me today, as Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Confirmed my uncle, Alan Blinken, as Ambassador to Belgium, and confirmed my father, Donald Blinken, as Ambassador to Hungary. I hope I don't break the streak today. My family, especially my wife and our children, John and Lila, is my greatest blessing. Our tradition of public service is a source of tremendous pride. I view that tradition as something of a sacred duty, payment on the debt that our family owes to the nation that gave so many of my relatives refuge and extraordinary opportunities across the generations. My grandfather, Maurice Blinken, found refuge in America after fleeing Russian pogroms. My father's wife, Vera Blinken, found refuge in America after fleeing the communist regime in Hungary. And my late stepfather, Samuel Pizar, found refuge in America after enduring the horrors of the Holocaust. Sam was the only survivor among his immediate family and school of 900 children in Białystok, Poland, after 4 years in the concentration camps. At the end of the war, he made a break from a death march into the Bavarian woods, and from his hideout, he heard the rumbling sound of a tank. And as he looked out, instead of seeing the dreaded Iron Cross, he saw a 5-pointed white star. And so he ran to the tank and got to it. The hatch opened. An African-American GI looked down at him. He fell to his knees and said the only 3 words that he knew in the English language that his mother had taught him before the war: God bless America. The GI lifted him into the tank, into freedom, into America. That's who we are. That's what we represent to the world, however imperfectly, and what we can still be when we're at our best. If I have the honor of serving as Secretary of State, that is the vision that I will pursue, a vision articulated often by President-elect Biden, doubtlessly informed by his time on this committee, when he said that the United States is a nation that leads not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. If confirmed, 3 priorities would guide my time as Secretary of State. First, I will work with you to reinvigorate the Department of State, investing in its greatest asset, the Foreign Service officers, the civil servants, the locally employed staff who animate American diplomacy. I know from firsthand experience their passion, their energy, their courage, often far from home, away from loved ones, sometimes in dangerous conditions, exacerbated now by the pandemic. They deserve our full support. If I'm confirmed as Secretary, they will have it. I'm committed to advancing our security and prosperity by building a diplomatic corps that fully represents America in all its talent and in all its diversity, recruiting, retaining, promoting officers with the skills to contend with 21st century challenges and who look like the country we represent, sparing no effort to ensure their safety and well-being, demanding accountability, starting with the Secretary of State, for building a more diverse, inclusive, and nonpartisan workforce. Second, working across government and with partners around the world, we will revitalize American diplomacy to deal with and take on the most pressing challenges of our time. We'll show up again, day in, day out, whenever and wherever Americans' prosperity and security is at stake. And we'll engage the world not as it was, but as it is, a world of rising nationalism, receding democracy, growing rivalry from China and Russia and other authoritarian states, mounting threats to a stable and open international system, and a technological revolution that is reshaping every aspect of our lives, especially in cyberspace. But for all that has changed, I believe some things remain constant. American leadership still matters. The reality is the world simply does not organize itself. When we're not engaged, when we're not leading, then one of two things is likely to happen. Either some other country tries to take our place, but not in a way that's likely to advance our interests and values, or, maybe just as bad, no one does, and then you have chaos. Either way, that does not serve the American people. I believe that humility and confidence should be the flip sides of America's leadership coin. Humility, because we have a great deal of work to do at home to enhance our standing abroad. And humility, because most of the world's problems are not about us in the first instance, even as they affect us. And no single country acting alone, even one as powerful as the United States, can fully and effectively address these problems. But we'll also act with confidence, with the confidence that America at its best still has a greater ability than any country on earth to mobilize others for the common good. Guided by these principles, I believe we can and we will overcome the COVID crisis, the greatest shared challenge since World War II. We can outcompete China and remind the world that a government of the people, for the people, can deliver for its people. We can take on the existential threat posed by climate change. We can revitalize our core alliances, force multipliers of our influence around the world. Together, we are far better positioned to counter threats from Russia, Iran, North Korea, and to stand up for democracy and human rights. And in everything we do around the world, I believe that we can and we must ensure that our foreign policy is actually working to deliver for American working families here at home. Let me conclude, if I may, Mr. Chairman, with a word about this institution, whose resilience and determination were on full display in the aftermath of the senseless and searing violence in these halls. Both the President-elect and I believe that we have to restore Congress's traditional role as a partner in our foreign policy making. In recent years, across administrations of both parties, Congress's voice in foreign policy has been diluted and diminished. That doesn't make the executive branch stronger. It makes our country weaker. President-elect Biden believes, and I share his conviction, that no foreign policy can be sustained without the informed consent of the American people. You are the representatives of the American people. You provide that advice and consent. We can only tackle the most urgent challenges we have if we work together, and I am dedicated to doing just that. And so if I'm confirmed, my commitment is to work with each and every one of you on behalf of all Americans. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blinken. And of course, your words about working with us is music to our ears, and we'll be happy to be a partner with you in that regard. So with that, we'll proceed to a round of questions, 10 minutes per senator. I'm going to reserve my time, and I'm going to yield to Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blinken, thank you for your statement. During our meeting yesterday, we discussed the department will need to repair and rebuild its relationship with this committee. I think it's after 28 years of doing public foreign policy in the House and the Senate, I've never seen a moment like this in terms of our relationship with the State Department. And having heard your opening statement, I'm confident you understand the importance of a constructive relationship between the Department and Congress. So I just have a few quick questions. I've always asked this of every Secretary of State nominee. I'd like to ask you, if you can answer it yes or no, I'd appreciate it. Do you agree that the State Department is accountable to Congress and the American people?
Yes.
Do you commit that the Department will keep this committee fully and currently informed on the Department's activities?
I do.
Do you understand and agree that a constructive relationship between the Department and this committee requires meaningful engagement and consultation with the committee while policies are being developed, not after the fact? And can you commit to ensuring that type of meaningful engagement?
Yes, I do, and I can.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Iran. This is going to be one of the most difficult challenges early on because Iran has accelerated. The maximum pressure campaign did not stop it from its acceleration. We were broken away from our allies. We could not even get from our traditional allies a vote at the United Nations on continuing the arms embargo, and that is not a good recipe to counter Iran. So I think there is a will to work together in a serious diplomatic engagement with Iran, but some of our concerns about the JCPOA, obviously time has lapsed, the sunset is closer, some of the other issues have come to the fore in JCPOA, and then you have all of Iran's other destabilizing activities. Some of us have worked, Senator Graham, a member of the committee, and I have worked along with others in thinking about how something along the lines of returning to the JCPOA, but with a commitment, a process by which the Iranians would have to deal with some of the challenges left by the JCPOA and other issues, looking at the possibility of a regional fuel bank so that not only the Iranians but those in the Gulf would be able to participate to receive nuclear fuel for domestic peaceful consumption, but not enrichment. We could diffuse a tinderbox in the region of all these countries who are looking now to enrich. Those are some ideas, not the totality of it. Can you give us a sense of where you're looking at with reference to Iran? And as part of that, are you going to proactively reach out to Congress in order to forge such a consensus that can move us together with one voice towards meeting Iran as a challenge?
Thank you very much, Senator. Let me answer the last question first in terms of reaching out, and the answer is yes, absolutely, especially on a policy as challenging as the one that we have to deal with when it comes to Iran. We are much better off if we can try to work through and think through these issues together, and you have my commitment that we intend and will do that, and I look forward to the consultations and conversations that we have. When it comes to Iran, a couple of things. First, President-elect Biden is committed to the proposition that Iran will not acquire a nuclear weapon, and we share, I know, that goal across this committee. An Iran with a nuclear weapon, or on the threshold of having one, with the capacity to build one on short order, would be an Iran that is even more dangerous than it already is when it comes to all of the other malicious activities that it's engaged in, whether it is support for terrorism, whether it is fueling and feeding its proxies, whether it is destabilizing the region. An Iran with a nuclear weapon or with the threshold capacity to build one is an Iran that would act potentially with even greater impunity than it already is. So I think we have an urgent responsibility to do whatever we can to prevent Iran from acquiring a weapon or getting close to the capacity to having the fissile material to break out on short notice. In my judgment, the JCPOA, for whatever its limitations, was succeeding on its own terms in blocking Iran's pathways to producing fissile material for a nuclear weapon on short order. It also featured, and a feature that continues, the most intrusive inspections and monitoring regime in the history of arms control. The challenge we face now is that we pulled out of the agreement. Iran is now taking steps to undo the various constraints that were imposed on it by the agreement. And so it has increased its stockpile of low-enriched uranium. It is now enriching at a higher level. It is deploying centrifuges in ways that were prohibited under the agreement. The result is, based on public reporting, the breakout time, the time it would take Iran to produce enough fissile material for one weapon, has gone from beyond a year, as it was under the JCPOA, to about 3 or 4 months, based at least on public reporting. And that potentially brings us right back to the crisis point that we were reaching before the deal was negotiated. And so the President-elect believes that if Iran comes back into compliance, we would too. But we would use that as a platform with our allies and partners who would once again be on the same side with us to seek a longer and stronger agreement, and also, as you and the Chairman have rightly pointed out, to capture these other issues, particularly with regard to missiles and Iran's destabilizing activities. That would be the objective. Having said that, I think we're a long way from there. We would have to see, once the President-elect is in office, what steps Iran actually takes and is prepared to take. We would then have to evaluate whether they were actually making good if they say they're coming back into compliance with their obligations, and then we would take it from there. But in the first instance, and the last thing I'll say on this, sir, is that yes, we absolutely will consult with you, and not only with you, I think as the Chairman suggested, it's also vitally important that we engage on the takeoff, not the landing, with our allies and with our partners in the region, to include Israel and to include the Gulf countries.
Thank you. Now, so I'm all for stronger and longer, and very much glad to hear that these other issues also the administration will look forward to engage and challenge Iran on. I think those are important. Let me turn to China. Many of us, certainly Senator Romney, since my first meeting with him when he came to the Senate, has made China one of the focal points, and he's right about the challenge that China poses. The chairman talked about his initiative. We, meaning Democrats, introduced a couple of months ago the America Leads Act, which brought all of the relevant committees, finance, on trade, commerce, on technology, armed services, just about everybody, in a comprehensive national strategy to deal with China, which deals with both investments here at home, because some of us believe we must not only confront China, we must compete with China to be successful. Diplomacy, alliances, security, values, and trade to create a truly competitive approach. And I believe this is one of the most significant national security challenges we will have, as well as economic challenges. Can you speak a little bit about, too, how do you see that?
First of all, I've read and applaud the Leads Act, and I have also read the very good report that the chairman did on China, and applaud virtually everything that's in it. I think there's a very strong foundation there upon which to build a bipartisan policy with regard to China. As we look at China, there is no doubt that it poses the most significant challenge of any nation state to the United States in terms of our interests, the interests of the American people. There are, as I see it, rising adversarial aspects to the relationship, certainly competitive ones, and still some cooperative ones when it is in our mutual interest. I think as we're thinking about how to deal with China, and I think this is reflected in the work that the committee has done, we have to start by approaching China from a position of strength, not weakness. And the good news is our ability to do that is largely within our control. Position of strength when we are working with, not denigrating, our allies. That's a source of strength for us in dealing with China. a position of strength when we are engaged and leading in international institutions, not pulling back and ceding the terrain to China to write the rules, the norms, and animate those institutions. A position of strength when we stand up for our values, when human rights are being abused in Xinjiang, or when democracy is being trampled in Hong Kong. Our ability to make the investments in ourselves, as you pointed out, that is a source of strength. The investments as necessary in our military to make sure that we can deter any aggression. All of these things are fully within our control. And if we come together and do them, I think we can then deal with the specific challenges that China poses from that position of strength, not a position of weakness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blinken, welcome. Let me start out by saying I got a phone call from a former contact in the Obama-Biden administration. I won't name the individual because I don't want to get that person in trouble. But it was a very welcome phone call. I think to summarize it, it started out saying that we're really in an unsustainable position in this country. We're so grossly divided. And particularly in areas of foreign policy, I mean, the standard saying is politics ought to end at the water's edge. I hope that can be true. I don't think it ever has been completely true, but I think there are some really good areas of agreement. And so it's a very sincere attempt to reach out and say, let's try and focus on areas of agreement. And by the way, as a chairman and ranking member on the European Subcommittee, whether it's Nord Stream 2, the European Energy Security and Diversification Act with Senator Murphy, we found those areas of agreement. So I really want to focus on that because I think that's one of the areas, one of the ways we can try and narrow that divide, which I think is just completely unsustainable in this nation. I think one of the areas I think we can all agree on is the world is a very dangerous and complicated place. And there's just no doubt about it. There's not a whole lot of black and white. There is black and white, but there's a lot of gray areas. And how you address, whether it's Iran or North Korea or China or Russia, these are difficult situations. So I have no doubt that you have just a wealth of knowledge, as did Secretary Kerry. I think there's a difference between knowledge, though, and judgment. And so, in all sincerity, I just really want to talk to you about judgment. And again, I know you take a look at the Trump administration and it's like all bad. I don't think that's true. And so let me start out what I think are foreign policy accomplishments and see whether or not you agree. First of all, we did get our NATO partners to invest more in NATO. And that's a good thing, right? Do you have any reservations about that?
I do not.
I think the peace or the agreements between Israel and Bahrain and UAE and Sudan and Morocco, those are good things. You're going to want to build on that, correct?
I very much agree.
Just a quick aside, again, knowledge versus judgment, it's something that Secretary Kerry thought was not possible whatsoever. Again, that's a judgment call, I understand that. But it's been proven wrong, and I guess I'm kind of looking for an acknowledgement that maybe past judgments have been overtaken by new knowledge and as times have moved on. One thing pretty near and dear in my heart is the agreement, the economic agreement between Kosovo and Serbia. You know, Wes Mitchell sent me over to Serbia and Kosovo a number of times, and you know, I don't want to take blame for this, but the situation was not improving until Rick Grinnell got involved and came up with the idea, okay, a lot of these things they're not going to agree on, but what they can agree on is economic advancement. And so we got an agreement. That's a good thing, correct?
I agree.
What kind of troubles me about the past record of the Obama-Biden administration, again, dealing with difficult situations, but I just want to give you the opportunity to discuss whether you've had any second thoughts on, for example, what happened in Libya. That's where, and you talked about American leadership, that's where President Obama famously said, we're going to lead from behind. And, you know, the world community kind of blew up Libya. That didn't turn out so well. We had Benghazi. Do you have any second thoughts in terms of what happened with Libya?
I do. And let me, before I address that, Senator, I would like to say I believe that no party has a monopoly on good ideas. And I hope that working together, we can pool all the good ideas from both sides of the aisle to try to advance the security and well-being of the American people abroad. I welcome doing that. Second, and very quickly, I think there are a number of things from where I sat that the Trump administration did beyond our borders that I would applaud. You mentioned a couple of them. The Abraham Accords, absolutely. Now, there's certain commitments that may have been made in the context of getting those countries to normalize relations with Israel that I think we should take a hard look at, and I imagine the committee feels the same way. But the work that was done to push forward on normalization with Israel, I applaud. It makes Israel safer. It makes the region safer. It's a good thing. And yes, I would hope that we could build on that as well. You mentioned the work on Kosovo and Serbia. I applaud that as well. The president-elect, as you know, spent a lot of time on those countries in the past, and I think he shares your conviction that there are things we can do to help move Kosovo forward and also hopefully move Serbia forward. And certainly, getting our NATO allies to invest more is a good thing. I think that's shared across administrations and across parties. And finally, let me just say that I also believe that President Trump was right in taking a tougher approach to China. I disagree very much with the way that he went about it in a number of areas, but the basic principle was the right one, and I think that's actually helpful to our foreign policy.
No, I think President Trump opened everybody's eyes in terms of China's malign intent. But again, I want to kind of quickly go through Libya, Syria,
Sure.
Not providing lethal defensive weaponry to Ukraine. Are those things you've given second thoughts to?
Yes. With regard to Libya, here was the situation we faced. We had Muammar Gaddafi saying that he was going to slaughter like rats those opposing him, including all of the inhabitants of Benghazi. And we faced what looked like the potential for a mass atrocity that was heading our way. And what was unique about the moment was the United Nations supported doing something about it, the Security Council, the partners and allies in the region did, and our allies in Europe did too. Having said that, and so I think the good news from where I sat, and I supported that effort. In fact, I think it's been written about. I was the President-elect's National Security Advisor at the time, and he did not agree with that course of action. And so, but we had the kind of relationship where I was able to say what I thought, and as you noted, we intervened. Here's what I think we misjudged. First, we didn't fully appreciate the fact that one of the things Gaddafi had done over the years was to make sure that there was no possible rival to his power. And as a result, there was no effective bureaucracy, no effective administration in Libya with which to work when he was gone. That made things much more challenging than I think we understood.
Okay, so again, because I want to step, so basically there was no plan afterwards. That's something, that's a lesson you've learned.
I think there was a plan that ran into some reality that unfortunately the result has been that there's been more space in Libya for extremist groups who filled some of the vacuum left by Gaddafi.
Okay, one of the things that Congress did unanimously is we approved $300 million of lethal defensive weaponry for Ukraine. The Obama administration never implemented. The Trump administration did. Do you still disagree with providing that lethal defensive weaponry, or do you think over time now that's been proven to be the correct decision by Congress and the Trump administration?
Senator, I support providing that lethal defensive assistance to Ukraine. In fact, I had the opportunity to write exactly that in the New York Times about 3 years ago.
One of the comments, and this is to prepare for this hearing, and I'm not going to enter this in the record, but my staff did provide me Senator McCain's 2014 floor speech, which I'm sure you've read. It was pretty,
I know it well.
pretty blistering. So one of the reasons I thought I'd kind of give you an opportunity to maybe respond, but the chairman also provided a list of questions, and one of the questions he asked was about Soleimani. I mean, is it a good thing that Soleimani is off the battlefield? And I was surprised because you remain adamant that it did not improve our national security. I mean, I would take the opposite side of that viewpoint. You want to try and explain that one? I mean, I think because he was a mastermind, because he was so effective, because he was responsible for hundreds of American lives lost, I don't see how you can agree that that enhances our national security.
No one is shedding a tear for the demise of Qasem Soleimani, and certainly when I was last in office, I saw firsthand the blood that he had on his hands. So no one regrets the fact that he's no longer there. I think from where I sat, Senator, the question is not whether taking him out was the right thing to do. It was gaming out what might be the consequences and asking ourselves whether, on balance, we would be left safer or not in taking that action. Previous administrations, including the Bush administration and the Obama administration, concluded that we wouldn't be. And I think what we saw after his death, including attacks on our positions in Iraq that left dozens, if not hundreds, of Americans with brain injuries, the fact that our forward posts in Iraq that were there to prevent the reemergence of ISIL had to pull back because of concerns that Iranian-backed militia, after Soleimani's death, would attack them. The fact that we are talking about, apparently, closing our embassy in Baghdad, again, for fear of the actions of these militia, and the fact that we've seen Iran acting out in a whole variety of ways. We're not the only actor in this drama. I think, on balance, that action actually left us less safe, not more safe.
Well, he was in Baghdad for a reason, probably to plan further attacks, so we don't know what.
Me too, and we're able to get this done. So, Mr. Austin, we welcome you, and a warm welcome to Charlene, your wife of more than 41 years. Now, my wife and I were 61 years. Think you'll make it? All right. We are very happy, Mr. Austin. You'll be introduced now by Senator Sullivan, a member of our committee, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last time we were together as senators, our capital was under siege. America's authoritarian rivals abroad have been gloating about our disunity. Democracy brings chaos, they tell their people. Better to have a strong hand that keeps order. We live in an imperfect democracy, no doubt. In the American, I am proud and honored to introduce Mr. Lloyd Austin, understands our imperfections more than many. But on closer inspection, the world's dictators have little to celebrate. Congress went back to work on January 6th to count electoral college votes. Tomorrow there will be a transfer of power at the top of our government, as there has been since the founding of our republic. At some point, Chinese and Russian citizens will ask, why can't we do that? Why don't we have strong, resilient institutions that ensure the regular election of new leaders and vest self-government in the people? When these questions are asked, authoritarians like Xi Jinping and Putin won't be gloating anymore because they don't have answers. What does this all have to do with Lloyd Austin? A lot. Mr. Austin has been nominated to lead one of America's most trusted institutions, the Department of Defense. Many of us have worked hard to rebuild our military, but we can all agree that there has been too much turmoil at the top. As its civilian leader, I am confident that Mr. Austin will bring steadiness, leadership, and respect to this indispensable institution. I got to know Mr. Austin in 2005 and 2006, serving together in an Army-heavy combatant command, conducting combat operations throughout the Middle East. We had what might be described today as an uneven power relationship. He was a two-star general, I was a major. He had spent decades on active duty, I was a reservist. He was a soldier, I was a Marine. I was just one of hundreds of field-grade infantry officers recalled to active duty, deployed in the region during a challenging time for our nation. But when I asked for his help, Mr. Austin gave it. When I had a problem, he listened. And when I asked for guidance on an important mission, he provided it. A critical hallmark of exceptional leadership, especially for organizations like the Pentagon, is not just how one treats superiors, but how one treats subordinates. What I saw was respect, integrity, and someone who gets things done in a difficult environment. It is clear to me that the core principles of Mr. Austin's life have been duty, honor, country. That may sound quaint to some, but I think having individuals of impeccable character at the top of our government is more important than ever. Other than integrity, there's no singular requirement for the difficult job of Secretary of Defense. But as the former director of the Joint Staff and CENTCOM commander, Mr. Austin certainly has insights on critical issues such as interagency budget battles, working with our allies, and congressional oversight. Mr. Austin is fully committed to the constitutional principle of civilian control of our military, something that those who serve in uniform typically understand and revere more than those who don't. In that regard, I thought some of the testimony from our recent hearing on this important topic was a bit simplistic, with discussions about so-called military logic versus political logic. So let me play devil's advocate. The very nature of this confirmation hearing is evidence that civilian control of the military is not at risk in America. I believe the related but opposite problem should be of more concern today. No military experience in the top ranks of our government. With the exception of Mr. Austin, no nominee on the incoming Biden national security team has ever served in uniform. With regard to the entire Biden cabinet, only one other nominee has any military experience at all. This is not wise. If confirmed, I'm sure I won't agree with all of Mr. Austin's decisions. But when the inevitable budget battles occur, it will be critical for our nation's security and military members to have a Secretary of Defense who understands firsthand the very real morale and readiness problems that result from drastic cuts to our military. Let me conclude with this. We are living through difficult times, a pandemic, racial tensions, riots, turmoil at the top of the Pentagon, and rising dangers from China, Russia, and Iran. Mr. Austin's confirmation won't solve all these problems, but it will help. He represents the best of America, a man of integrity, humility, and character with a wealth of relevant experience. Our allies will take comfort in his confirmation, and our adversaries will take pause. And as America's first black Secretary of Defense, he will be an inspiration to millions, both in and out of uniform. I urge my colleagues to support his confirmation and the waiver it requires. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan, and I do agree with your comments wholeheartedly, and I believe that we're going to be doing the right thing here. Now we have another introduction by Secretary Panetta, a former Secretary of Defense and a former very close friend of mine, served together in the House together, and it's nice. It's been too long, Secretary Panetta, and you are recognized for your part of this introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Inhofe, I always enjoyed our friendship going back to the House of Representatives. Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of this committee. It's an honor for me to again have the opportunity to appear before this distinguished committee, this time alongside Senator Dan Sullivan, to introduce President-elect Biden's nominee to be the 28th Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. We do meet at a time of great peril for our nation, but it's also a time of great promise. We have endured a harrowing year, dealing with the deadly pandemic, and most recently, a violent attack on our Capitol, this Congress, and our democracy itself. Our adversaries are watching very closely. They're trying to determine whether America will remain the strongest and most resilient democracy the world has ever known. It's also a time of great promise. Tomorrow, at this time, our country will have a new president, a man who many of you know personally from his decades of service as a United States Senator, a man whom I've known for over 40 years and had the privilege to work with during my years in the Congress, in the White House, and I was honored to serve him when he was Vice President as CIA Director and Secretary of Defense. Joe Biden is absolutely committed to ensuring that we remain the strongest military power on the face of the earth. He believes that we must have the best trained, best equipped, and most capable fighting force in the world. And he believes that the Department of Defense must be led by someone who not only knows the issues of war and peace, but also knows the heart and soul, the women and men who bravely wear the uniform, put their lives on the line, and fight for our freedom. That's why he selected Lloyd Austin to serve as Secretary of Defense. Lloyd's accomplishments at the Department of Defense are without peer. He graduated from West Point. He led troops at almost every level, commanded in combat, served as America's military commander during the drawdown in Iraq. He served as Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and as Commanding General of the U.S. Central Command. And all of you know that that's one of the key combat commands at the Department of Defense. I met Lloyd when I came to DOD as Secretary in July of 2011. We had just 6 months to implement the drawdown in Iraq, and Lloyd was the man on the ground charged with getting it done. It was a huge logistical task. He consulted carefully with the President, with the Vice President, the National Security Advisor, his colleagues at the State Department, and those in the intelligence community. And he carried out with diligence and professionalism the plan that was set forth by me and other civilian leaders at the Pentagon. He had to negotiate with the Iraqis, who were not easy to negotiate with at that time, and ensured that our troops and all of their equipment could redeploy safely while protecting America's core national security interests. I mentioned this episode because I know that many of you are wondering whether a former general officer can uphold the principle of civilian control of the military. I've spoken to Lloyd, and there is no doubt in my mind that he will uphold the principle of civilian control. And frankly, the best military officers that I had the honor to serve with are those who understand the importance of civilian control. And Lloyd was one of those. He will respect the civilian chain of command, enshrined not only in tradition, but in law. He will ensure there is transparency and accountability at the. He'll make himself and department leaders available to this committee and to the Congress for oversight. And he'll provide regular briefings to the American people. He will support the appointment of civilian leaders across the office of the Secretary and the department. He knows that while we cannot defend our nation without our armed forces, we cannot defend our democratic form of government without strong civilian stewardship of our national security. Lloyd Austin is a man of uncommon character and decency and courage. He's a trailblazer, feared by our enemies and admired by those that he led. He was the first African-American general officer to lead the Army Corps in combat. He was the first African-American to command an entire theater of war. And if confirmed, he will be the first African-American to lead the Department of Defense. In sum, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I believe that Lloyd Austin is the right person at the right time, man that we need at this moment to lead the Department of Defense. He's clear-eyed about the threats, and we know there are a number of threats we're dealing with abroad: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, cyber attackers, and terrorists. He understands the value of alliances, keeping them strong, supporting them. And he's prepared to shoulder the awesome burden of sending our best men and women in uniform, if necessary, into harm's way, the most difficult task we, who've been Secretary of Defense, had to assume. As Americans watched the tragic images from the Capitol Rotunda on January 6th, I was reminded of one painting in that space that has always represented for me the ideal of service to country. That's the oil painting of George Washington resigning his commission as general in the Army so that he could assume the duties of being the nation's first president. It's a statement about our democratic form of government that has stood the test of time in that hollowed citadel of liberty. The tradition of military leaders from Washington, Eisenhower, Marshall, to the large number of veterans who are serving in Congress today, including my own son, of taking off our uniforms, returning to civilian life, to lead and to serve again. That tradition is as old as our republic itself and essential to the quality of leadership we need in order to protect our Constitution and our national security. I am absolutely confident that Lloyd Austin will follow in that tradition. I'm honored to introduce him to the committee and urge his swift confirmation.
Thank you, Secretary Panetta. It's great to be with you again after all these years, and you haven't lost a thing. Okay, Mr. Austin, we have our first 7 questions, and you know what they are, so you're ready to answer them, but answer them audibly if you would. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflict of interest?
I have.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established for requested communications, including questions for the record in hearings?
I will.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
I will.
Will those witnesses be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
They will.
Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify upon request before this committee?
I do.
And do you agree to provide documents, including copies of electronic forms of communication, in a timely manner when requested by a duly constituted committee, or to consult with the committee regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such documents?
I do.
And have you assumed any duties or undertaking any actions which would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
I have not.
Thank you very much. As Secretary Panetta clearly stated, we don't have there's not a time in the past that we've had more threats than we're facing today. And throughout my tenure as chairman, this committee is focused on ensuring that the DoD's authorities and resources it needs to implement the National Defense Strategy. This document is a document that means a lot to all of us here. It's been our blueprint we've used since 2018. It's put together by 6 knowledgeable Democrats, 6 knowledgeable Republicans, and it's served as our blueprint. And I would assume that you would continue to do that. As the Secretary of Defense, second in chain of command, you'd be responsible and accountable to the President of the United States and to the American people for implementing this strategy. I look forward to learning how you will drive military readiness for the strategic competition with China and Russia, which we've talked about at length here, how you will also handle some of the provocations from rogue nations like Iran and North Korea. Even worse is that our military's technology advantage has eroded. We're used to the old days when we had the best of everything, and that's not true anymore. We fell down a little bit. I know that between the years of 2010 and 2015, we were dropping our defense in terms of dollars down by about 25%, while China was increasing theirs, Mr. Austin, by 83%, and that's not acceptable. The nation and the Department of Defense is going to tackle this problem head on if we hope to preserve and defend our way of life from those who would do harm to us. Now, if confirmed, you would have the honor of leading a team of Americans who represent everything that is noble and best for our nation, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, Marines, Space Guardians, our military families. And by the way, on the military families, we always hear from those who are a little less enthusiastic about a strong national defense that we spend more than Russia and China put together. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is we care about the families. We care about housing. We care about the largest single expense that we have in military is for our families, our military families. Now, in a communist country, you don't have that. They just give you a gun and said, go out and shoot people. So that's what we are concerned about, and we will continue to do that. Our many defense civil servants also sacrifice day in and day out for our national security and rarely get credit for they deserve. The department will require strong civilian leadership. For you to serve as the Secretary of Defense, Congress must provide an exception to the law that prohibits individuals from being appointed if they are within 7 years of their military service. Last week, this committee held a hearing on civilian control of the armed services, which I think it was instructive. I've never been all that concerned about the 7 years, but others have. I hope that you will share with the committee what actions you will take to ensure your tenure reflects and protects the principle of civilian control of the military if you are confirmed. We look forward to hearing your views on these and other important issues. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I join you in welcoming Lloyd Austin to today's hearing. General, I want to thank you for your 4 decades of military service to our country, and I appreciate your willingness to return to public service, this time in a civilian capacity. In addition, I want to welcome your wife, Charlene. I also want to recognize and thank former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, who spoke on your behalf, and in addition, Senator Sullivan for their introductions. Today's hearing is also very different from previous Secretary of Defense nomination hearings. Due to recent security threats, the Acting Secretary of Defense has authorized the deployment of 25,000 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. I never thought I would see such a large display of U.S. military force on the streets of our country. I thank the service members and the other federal agencies for ensuring that the U.S. Capitol and the inauguration is safe and secure. In addition, the world continues to be engulfed in a global pandemic that has caused hundreds of thousands of deaths in the United States and sickened millions more. This has not only affected the way we conduct our hearings, but has become the paramount issue facing the new administration, including the Department of Defense. General Austin, you have a long and distinguished career. You have served at the highest echelons in the Army and capped your service as the commander of U.S. Central Command. If confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense, you will face a daunting array of current and emerging security threats. U.S. strategic priorities have shifted in recent years, as reflected in the 2018 National Defense Strategy. to focus increasingly on the near-peer competition with China and Russia. At the same time, the Trump administration, through its disruptive behavior, has eroded faith in U.S. global leadership with adverse strategic consequences. Indeed, our national defense strategy must be a component of an overall national security strategy that embraces all aspects of soft power as well as military power. As a former commander of U.S. Central Command, you have valuable experience to addressing security threats in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere in the CENTCOM area of operations. The incoming Biden administration faces an immediate challenge with respect to Iran's growing nuclear, ballistic missile, and proxy capabilities. The Department of Defense will play a key role in deterring these threats while supporting diplomatic efforts. In Iraq and Syria, while the physical ISIS caliphate has been defeated, the underlying factors that gave rise to ISIS and al-Qaeda remain largely unaddressed. Defending against transnational violence, extremist groups will require continued vigilance. In Afghanistan, our allies and partners need to be reassured that going forward they will be consulted up front on any changes in U.S. force posture. The incoming administration will need to assess the conditions on the ground, including whether the Taliban is in fact living up to their commitments and what level of support is required to protect U.S. national security interests and invigorate a diplomatic solution. In addition to these broad strategic challenges, as Secretary of Defense, you must also grapple with issues specific to the management of the department. The fiscal year 2022 budget will be the first that is unconstrained by the Budget Control Act, and some view this as an opportunity to redirect the overall defense budget. This year will mark an inflection point in how the department prioritizes resources it needs to accomplish its missions. The department must focus on critical technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and cybersecurity, while also emphasizing rapid delivery of advanced new weapon systems on timelines that keep pace with technological change. The Department of Defense must partner with Congress to find ways to retire legacy systems without incurring too much risk operationally or economically. The department also has management challenges that require investment in great people to manage the complexities of the Pentagon and its processes, rather than an endless search for budget cuts and workforce reductions. Ensuring robust funding for full-spectrum readiness, including additional home station training, flying hours, steaming days, depot maintenance, and installation sustainment, has been a high priority for this committee, and I expect it will be yours too. The department must also hold private housing companies and their defense chain of command accountable to ensure families live in the homes they deserve. Our men and women in uniform and the civilian workforce that supports them remain this committee's top concern, and they must be yours as well. Recruiting and retaining a sufficiently sized, trained, and equipped military of the necessary quality of character and talent to meet national defense requirements is always a paramount goal of the Secretary of Defense and this committee. Successful recruiting and ensuring the health of the force has been and will continue to be a challenge while we finish the national fight against COVID. General Austin, as I have recounted in great detail, if confirmed, you will manage the department coping with many extraordinarily difficult issues. It will require strong civilian leadership to address these challenges and to reverse the erosion of civil-military relations over the past several years. However, in order to serve as the Secretary of Defense, Congress must provide an exception to the statutory requirement that prohibits individuals from being appointed if they are within 7 years of their military service. Last week, this committee heard from expert witnesses on the state of civilian control of the armed forces. Some members expressed concern that providing an exception for you to serve as the Secretary of Defense, particularly so soon after Secretary Mattis, could harm civil-military relations. It is a valid concern, but as our witnesses testified, it is possible to mitigate the effects if you demonstrate your commitment to empowering civilians in the department. Further, we must also hear how you view the role of Secretary of Defense and how that position is different from your days of honorable service as a military officer. This distinction is critical, as the Secretary of Defense is an inherently political position requiring a skill set for managing a vast bureaucracy while balancing personalities within the department and across our federal agencies. Relatedly, an effective secretary must be transparent with Congress. Tensions often exist between the executive and legislative branches, regardless of political party. However, the department must keep Congress fully informed on critical national security developments so that we can conduct congressional oversight. General Austin, with these broad categories in mind, I hope you will candidly share what actions you will take to ensure your tenure reflects and protects the principle of civilian control of the military. Finally, strengthening civil-military relations is not the sole responsibility of the Secretary of Defense. Congress has a role, too. This includes expeditiously confirming qualified civilian nominees to serve in the Pentagon. Furthermore, I believe Congress should revisit the headquarters reductions implemented over the past several years. While well-intentioned, these budget cuts have sapped the Department of experience, expertise, and institutional knowledge, all of which degrades the Department's ability to oversee the critical policy issues that are integral for robust civilian oversight. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to hearing from our nominee.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Excellent, excellent statement. With some senators attending remotely, I want to let everyone know how we're going to run this thing. Since it's impossible to know exactly when our colleagues who will be joining via computer, we will not follow our standard early bird timing rule. Instead, we'll handle the order of questions by seniority, alternating between sides, Democrat and Republican, until we have gone through everyone. Then we'll see how much time we have left and what the wish is. We will do the standard, instead of doing the standard 5 minutes, Senator Reid and I have agreed that 7-minute rounds might be more appropriate. And I ask my colleagues on the computers to please keep an eye on the clock, which you should see on your screens. And we'll try to adhere to those 7-minute rounds. Finally, to allow for everyone to be heard, whether in the room or on a computer, I ask all colleagues to please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Mr. Austin, we will begin with your opening statement, and be assured that the entirety of your written statement will be made a part of the record. General Austin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Reid, and members of this committee. I'm grateful for your time this afternoon, especially during these momentous days. It was apparent to me and to all Americans 2 weeks ago how seriously you take your duties to the Constitution, and I thank you for that commitment. I know that you share my gratitude for the commitment of the men and women of the Department of Defense as well, who share your devotion to that founding document, our Constitution. Many of them are serving overseas. Some of them are serving just outside this room. And all of them are keeping us safe. We owe much to their selflessness and to that of their families. I want to thank Senator Sullivan and Secretary Panetta for their kind words of introduction. I am truly grateful. And of course, I want to thank my wonderful wife, Charlene, who, like today, has stood by my side for more than 40 years, guiding me, supporting me, and making me a better man. I'm also very grateful to President-elect Biden for asking me to serve my country again. I value the strength of my relationship with him, and I am humbled by the trust and confidence that he has placed in me. And I hope this hearing will earn me your trust. Let me say at the outset that I understand and respect the reservations that some of you have expressed about having another recently retired general at the head of the Department of Defense. The safety and security of our democracy demands competent civilian control of our armed forces, the subordination of military power to the civil. I spent my entire life committed to that principle. In war and in peace, I implemented the policies of civilians elected and appointed over me, leaders like Secretary Panetta. And I know that being a member of the President's cabinet, a political appointee, requires a different perspective and unique duties from a career in uniform. I intend to surround myself with and empower experienced, capable civilian leaders who will enable healthy civil-military relations grounded in meaningful oversight. Indeed, I plan to include the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in top decision-making meetings, ensuring strategic and operational decisions are informed by policy. I will rebalance collaboration and coordination between the Joint Staff and the OSD staff to ensure civilian input is integrated at every level of the process. And I will make clear my expectation that the Pentagon work hand in glove with the State Department, supporting the work of our diplomats. Now, I know that a large measure of civilian control of our military lies right here with this body. And if you confirm me, I assure you that the Pentagon under my leadership will respect your oversight responsibilities, and we will be transparent with you. And I will provide you my best counsel, and I will seek yours. And just like you, I will take seriously the many challenges facing our country, the most immediate of which, in my view, is the pandemic. And if confirmed, I will quickly review the department's contributions to coronavirus relief efforts, ensuring that we're doing everything that we can to help distribute vaccines across the country and to vaccinate our troops and preserve readiness. We'll also do everything we can for our military families. They too are educating kids at home and losing their jobs and trying to stock the pantry. I know this committee shares my view that we owe them our best efforts to lighten that load. We also owe our people a working environment free of discrimination, hate, and harassment. And if confirmed, I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault and to rid our ranks of racists and extremists, and to create a climate where everyone fit and willing has the opportunity to serve this country with dignity. The job of the Department of Defense is to keep America safe from our enemies. But we can't do that if some of those enemies lie within our own ranks. For those enemies and adversaries outside the ranks and around the world, we need resources to match strategy, and strategy matched to policy, and policy matched to the will of the American people. Globally, I understand that Asia must be the focus of our effort. And I see China in particular as a pacing challenge for the department. And I know I'll need your help in tackling these problems and to give our men and women in uniform the tools that they need to fight and win. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, while I did not seek this job, I consider it an honor. And if confirmed, I will carry out the mission of the Department of Defense, always with the goal to deter war and ensure our nation's security. And I will uphold the principle of civilian control of the military as intended. And I would not be here asking for your support if I felt that I was unable or unwilling to question people with whom I once served in operations that I once led, or too afraid to speak my mind to you or to the President. I was a general and a soldier, and I'm proud of that. But today I appear before you as a citizen, the son of a postal worker and a homemaker from Thomasville, Georgia, and I'm proud of that too. And if you confirm me, I am prepared to serve now as a civilian, fully acknowledging the importance of this distinction. And I thank you again for consideration of my nomination and for support of our men and women in uniform, our civilians, and their families, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, General Austin. Great statement. You heard my comments, General Austin, about the document, the National Defense Strategy. You're familiar with this. I'm sure you've read it many times. What do you think about its relevance today? Have you seen changes that should be made in this, or what you're feeling today contemporarily about this statement?
I think much of the document is absolutely on track for today's challenges, Mr. Chairman. As is the case with all strategies, if confirmed, one of the things that I would look to do is to work to update the strategy and work within the confines of the guidance and the policy issued by the next administration.
Yeah, well, that's right, and the guidance also from this document, I think is still relevant today. In this document, the previous two Secretaries of Defense, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Esper, both agreed that that document it prescribed that we'd probably need a 3 to 5% real growth in defense budget effectively in the coming years. Do you agree generally with that statement?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I said in the opening statement, I believe that our resources need to match our strategy, and our strategy needs to match our policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would assume that would be yes. And others were going to be asking about the civilian and military relations. I know that, but let me cover a couple of things that I think are important. On the nuclear triad, a lot of people who have different ideas on what we should do and the priorities we have in our defense system, they try to whittle away at the nuclear triad. And we have always felt, in the Secretaries of Defense, that nuclear deterrence is, do you agree with them that their assessment that nuclear deterrence is the DOD's highest priority mission?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
And do you agree that the triad, the land, air, and sea-based nuclear delivery platforms are still necessary, even though we do hear a lot of arguments that 2 of the 3 would be adequate? What do you think?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the triad has served us well in the past, and I certainly believe that it will continue to do so going forward. And I personally support the triad.
Good. We've had kind of a forgotten continent for a long period of time in Africa. I can remember when Africa was in 3 different commands. It was in the PACOM, the Central Command, and the EUCOM. And we came along with AFRICOM, and I think things have really improved since that time. And I think it's a critical theater for implementing this national defense strategy that we have. We see China all over. People talk about the South China Sea, about their building of the islands and all these things that are going on, but they forget that China has, for the first time, left their city limits to support a major objective on their behalf, and that's in Djibouti. And they go not just in Djibouti, but all throughout China, as far south as the southern part of Tanzania, and so it's very active in that area. I would ask you, right now we have some 6,000 DOD personnel on the continent. I know there's an effort in this last administration to be reducing in some areas what our presence, what our resources, how they should be put out. My feeling was that we had inadequate resources to start with only 6,000 in the entire continent. Do you have any thoughts that you've given to that in terms of the resources that we need to use in that part of the world?
Mr. Chairman, Africa, like some other places in the world, has been one of those places where we've been able to gain good effect with a small amount of investment by helping our partners to increase their ability to defend their sovereign territory and to protect themselves.
That's excellent. We have to keep in mind that many of our closest allies are there right now, and if we should deteriorate our presence in any way, we would, I have a feeling they'd do the same thing. So I appreciate that very much. One last thing I want to touch on, because it is a current issue. Ever since the International Court of Justice ruled way back in 1975, I believe it was, that we have in Western Sahara, we supported a referendum for self-determination. Now, the United States has done that ever since the 1970s. The UN has done that since the 1970s. The African Union has done that, and most all of the 52 nations of Africa have all stated that the Western Sahara should have a referendum for self-determination. What do you think?
Well, that's an issue that I certainly would want to take a closer look at, Mr. Chairman, before I gave you a detailed answer, but it's one of the things that I'll look at if confirmed right away going into the position.
Yeah, and I'd like to have you keep in mind that they have been consistent for so many years now, and so I would anticipate that your feelings would be the same. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Austin. One issue that is obvious is the discussion of the erosion of civilian control, participation, influence on the Department of Defense. That was highlighted by the National Defense Security document, which the chairman has displayed. But the suggestion there was it was not something that was happening in an instant, that it was taking place over years. And part of that, I believe, is the lack of competent civilian authorities in place. There are many individuals, as I suggested in my statement, that are acting. There are others who are civil servants who have been pushed up into jobs that normally require confirmation, and there's been a lack of sometimes candidates for confirmation. So I would ask you, if you are confirmed, will you do your utmost to ensure that every position, civilian position in the department is filled, that we get nominees promptly? I know you have to work through the White House, and that other individuals will be put in positions where they are both skilled and qualified.
Absolutely, Senator Reid. I will do everything I can to move as quickly as I can to move to fill those positions with experienced and competent, qualified civilians. And I will need the help of this body to make sure that that we're moving quickly.
Yeah, I concur. This has to be a collaborative effort. I think in addition to that, with the civilian employee members, and as you suggest in your remarks, you have to ensure that there's a very appropriate working relationship with uniformed personnel, particularly in the Joint Staff. And from your comments, I assume that'll be one of your priorities, to make sure that, and indeed that the civilians have a critical role in that process. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct, Senator Reid. I think it's imperative that the OSD staff maintain primacy in terms of crafting strategy and policy, and I think we'll need the right civilians in key positions to help us do that, and we've already begun to move down that road. You've seen Colin Call nominated to be the Undersecretary for Policy, very talented young man that will do well. You've seen Kath Hicks nominated to be the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So we're off to a good start, and we'll continue to maintain momentum in filling those positions and making sure that we rebalance the workload between the Joint Staff and the Secretariat.
Thank you. On another subject.
statute. Have you read the 30-year shipbuilding plan, Mr. Austin?
I've not read the 30-year plan yet, Senator Wicker.
Are you familiar with the fact that the 30-year shipbuilding plan calls for increasing our requirement? Actually, it increases our requirement from 355 ships to 405 manned ships by the year 2051.
I am familiar with that fact.
Do you support that finding?
Well, I certainly, I would just say, Senator, our Navy is the most capable naval force on the face of the planet. It will remain so if I'm confirmed and become Secretary of Defense. I think that it's important that we maintain the capabilities that we'll need to be relevant not only today, but relevant tomorrow. So I look forward to getting on the ground and, if confirmed, and working with the leadership of the Navy to better understand, the requirements and how we're going to support those requirements. And also I look forward to working with this body to make sure that we have the right resources to support that requirement.
Well, that does bring me to a point that I need to make, and that is that within the administration, it's not only the White House and it's not only DOD, but also OMB is a mighty big gorilla sitting in the room there, and they force a lot of constraints upon us. Let me just say to you that I hope you will soon become familiar with this shipbuilding plan, and be able to give us a more definite answer about the need for an increased Navy to do the things that we have to do. It calls for adding 82 new ships between 2022 and 2026 at a cost of $147 billion. Previously, that number was only 44 ships. So the